There's no way a black woman is in special forces. Especially not someone like your mom. That sentence, sharp, condescending, and said with a laugh, cut through the air of the Westgate Mall's sneaker aisle like a blade. 12-year-old Zaria Brooks stood frozen. Her fingers clenched the edge of a shoebox. Her face burned. Her best friend, Brielle, whispered, "Ignore him." But the damage was already done. Officer Derek Monroe, off-duty and cocky, leaned against a shelf full of Jordans like he was the main character in a bad sitcom. His laugh echoed off the tile floors. Shoppers paused. Some pretended not to notice. Others watched like it was free entertainment. What started as a simple after-school shopping trip had spiraled into something Zaria never saw coming. Her truth turned into a punchline. She'd only said one sentence. "My mom's in special forces." Proudly. Truthfully. And in return, she got mocked in front of strangers. But what Monroe didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sergeant Camille Brooks was already walking toward the entrance. Combat boots striking the floor like thunder. This wasn't just a story about disrespect. This was a black story about pride, prejudice, and power. So before we go any further, ask yourself, what would you do if your truth was laughed at? If someone tried to erase your story, while the world just stood by, would you shrink? Or would you stand your ground, even if your voice shook? Stick around, because what happens next? It flips the entire store, and the entire moment, on its head. And if stories like this hit you deep, if you're tired of seeing people dismissed because of how they look, who they are, or what others think they can't be, then hit subscribe right now. Not for us. For every kid who's ever been told they're lying, when all they did was tell the truth. This isn't just one moment. It's a wake-up call. And you're about to feel every second of it. Zaria Brooks wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just a regular 7th grader, standing in the sneaker section of Finish Line at Westgate Mall, Houston, holding a pair of bright red Nikes she hoped her mom would say yes to. Her hair was pulled into a high puff, her jeans cuffed neatly above her sneakers. There was nothing extraordinary about the moment, until there was. She and her best friend Brielle Hampton had been chatting about school, gym class, and how they'd both bombed their math quiz. The topic shifted to shoes, then to parents, then, naturally, to what their moms did. Zaria had said it casually, like it was no big deal. "My mom's in special forces," she said, setting the shoebox down. "She's just wrapping up a training rotation at Fort Liberty. That's why she's late." Brielle blinked. "Wait, special forces? Like, real deal military?" Zaria nodded. "Yeah. She's Staff Sergeant Camille Brooks. She's been deployed, like, 5 times." There was no boast in her tone. No exaggeration. Just the pride of a girl who knew her mom was someone strong. That's when it happened. The laugh. A short, dry, dismissive laugh from a man a few feet away flipping through a rack of hoodies. His arms were crossed, badge clipped casually to his belt, like he wanted people to know who he was, without saying a word. "Special Forces," he repeated under his breath, shaking his head. "Right. And I'm James Bond." Zaria turned. So did Brielle. Officer Derek Monroe was off duty, in jeans and a faded Astros shirt. He looked like someone's dad, someone ordinary. But his words, they weren't casual. They carried weight. He stepped closer, eyebrows raised in a mock-friendly expression. "Come on now," he said. "You expect people to believe your mom's out there jumping out of planes with the green berets?" Zaria didn't answer right away. Her heart picked up speed. "She is," she said quietly, but firmly. "Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it's not true." Monroe chuckled again, louder this time. "Sweetheart, I've been in law enforcement 22 years. I've worked with the real ones. I know what they look like. And they don't look like someone's soccer mom." Brielle's jaw dropped. Zaria clenched her fists. Because in that moment, this wasn't just about shoes. It was about dignity. And a truth she wasn't about to let anyone laugh away. Officer Derek Monroe didn't stop at just one laugh. He leaned against the shelf, arms folded like he had all the time in the world, his voice loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear without even trying. His tone was soaked in smugness, like he'd just caught a kid in a lie and couldn't wait to announce it to the room. "I'm telling you," he said, shaking his head with a chuckle, "there's no way your mom is in special forces. That's not a job just anyone gets. It takes years of combat experience, tactical training, and—" He paused, narrowing his eyes slightly as if measuring his words. "A very specific kind of background." He didn't need to say more. Zaria heard it. So did Brielle. So did everyone who had started pretending to browse a little slower, lingered a little longer. They didn't need to know Zaria or her mother to understand what was being implied. Not someone like her. Zaria's jaw tightened. She could feel the heat rushing to her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood a little taller, eyes locked on the officer. "You don't know her," she said, her voice even. "You don't know anything about her." Monroe grinned as if that was cute. "You're right, kid. I don't. But I do know what I've seen. I've served beside real heroes, men who've gone through hell and back. And no offense, but your story just doesn't add up." His emphasis on men wasn't subtle. Neither was the way his eyes briefly flicked over Zaria's skin, as if checking off a mental list of reasons why she couldn't possibly be telling the truth. Brielle looked around. No one said a word. Not the mother nearby folding toddler jeans. Not the teenage boys by the exit. Not the employee restocking shoelaces on the far wall. Silence echoed louder than any of Monroe's words. Zaria could feel the weight of that silence pressing on her shoulders. Monroe kept going, now fully playing to the crowd. "Look, there's no harm in pretending," he said with a shrug. "Kids make stuff up all the time. My nephew once said his dad was Iron Man. It's just imagination." Zaria swallowed hard. She wasn't pretending. And her mom wasn't a fantasy. But in that moment, no one seemed willing to believe her. Except her. And that had to be enough. The crowd didn't show up all at once. It started with a man in cargo shorts pretending to check out a rack of running socks. Then a woman with a stroller paused nearby, flipping through clearance baby shoes, though her eyes were fixed on Zaria. Two teens by the entrance whispered behind a wall of hoodies. One of them nudged the other, phone halfway out of his pocket. They weren't really shopping. They were watching. Zaria felt every stare like heat on her back. She looked at Brielle, who mouthed silently, "We should just go." But Zaria didn't move. Not because she wasn't scared, she was. Her hands trembled slightly, her knees felt loose beneath her, but she knew that if she walked away, it would be like handing the man across from her the victory he thought he already had. Monroe, meanwhile, was in his element. He cracked another smile, gesturing loosely toward the slowly forming circle around them. "You see," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "this is the problem. These stories. They get passed around, and suddenly everyone thinks they're the exception. Like rules and reality don't apply anymore." He looked directly at Zaria again. "No offense, but your mom being special forces? That's like saying your neighbor's a superhero. Sounds cool. But it's not real life." Someone chuckled behind her. Zaria didn't turn around to see who. The sting wasn't just in Monroe's words. It was in the absence of anyone saying otherwise. No one stepped forward. No one said, "Hey, maybe she's telling the truth." Not even a polite, "Let's give her the benefit of the doubt." Silence wasn't neutral. Not in moments like this. It spoke as loud as Monroe did. Brielle finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "She's not lying." Monroe raised his eyebrows, amused. "You her lawyer now?" Brielle said nothing more. Zaria's throat tightened, but she managed to speak. "My mom earned everything. She's not just someone in a uniform. She's a soldier." Monroe shrugged. Sure, kid. And I'm a Navy SEAL. Laughter again, lighter this time, but sharper. It made Zaria feel small. Like she was 12 years old and trying to carry a truth no one believed in but her. She wasn't trying to be brave. She just didn't want to stay silent. Zaria had always believed that telling the truth was the right thing. Her mom taught her that. Be honest, even when it's hard. Speak up, even when you're scared. That's what integrity looks like. But standing there in a sneaker store, surrounded by strangers pretending not to watch, Zaria wasn't so sure anymore. Because her truth, something sacred, something proud, had become the day's entertainment. A grown man with a badge was laughing at her like she'd said something ridiculous. And nobody said otherwise. Not even the people who clearly knew better. Not the couple nearby holding hands. Not the woman behind the register who paused mid-scan to listen. Not the boy filming with his phone as if this were just some viral moment waiting to happen. The humiliation settled deep. Not just in her cheeks or chest, but in her spirit. She wanted to disappear. And maybe, for a split second, she even wished she'd never said it. Wished she had just said her mom worked at an office or stayed home or anything normal. Something easy. Something safe. She felt Brielle touch her elbow, trying to ground her, but her hands were clenched tight. Her voice caught in her throat. Monroe's smile stretched wider. You know, he said, lowering his voice a little, I've seen kids make up all kinds of stuff. But this one. This is top-shelf imagination. Special forces? Come on. Zaria's fingers dug into her palm. That's when doubts started to creep in, not about her mom, but about herself. Maybe she shouldn't have said anything. Maybe this was her fault. Maybe she should have waited until they got home, told Brielle in private, maybe whispered it with the bedroom door shut. But even as the shame rose, something else flared up alongside it, anger. Not just at Monroe. At the people watching. At the silence. At the idea that someone could be so sure she was lying simply because of who she was and who her mother was. Zaria raised her chin. She's coming, she said quietly. You'll see. Monroe snorted. Great. Can't wait to meet Wonder Woman. Zaria didn't blink. Because she had already stopped trying to convince him. Now, she was waiting for the moment he'd have to face the truth. With no laugh track to hide behind, the mall doors slid open with a soft hiss, letting in a rush of afternoon chatter and footsteps from the food court. No one paid much attention at first, just another shopper coming through. But Zaria felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air. The kind of shift that happens when someone walks in and commands space without saying a word. Staff Sergeant Camille Brooks stepped inside. Her boots hit the polished tile in a steady, unwavering rhythm. Her uniform was clean and sharp, each patch and stripe exactly where it belonged. The beret tucked neatly under her arm, name tag visible, rank shining under the overhead lights. Her posture? Solid. Focused. Controlled. She wasn't walking fast, but she wasn't strolling either. She was approaching. Zaria's breath caught in her throat. The embarrassment still lingered, but for the first time, it had company, hope. Across the store, Monroe kept talking. He hadn't noticed her yet. Still smirking. Still performing. Then his eyes shifted. They landed on Camille just as she crossed the threshold of the store. And for a moment, just one heartbeat, his expression faltered. He tried to recover quickly, pushing off the shelf and straightening up. But his smile didn't return with the same ease. Camille's eyes moved through the room with quiet calculation. She didn't rush. She didn't scan frantically. Her gaze was trained, deliberate, like she'd spent years knowing exactly how to assess a space in seconds. Then she saw Zaria. And she saw the crowd. And she saw him. Camille walked toward them, not breaking stride, not breaking eye contact once she locked onto her daughter. Zaria stood frozen. 1,000 emotions ran through her at once, relief, pride, fear of what her mom might say, and the undeniable urge to run straight into her arms. But she didn't move. She stayed where she was, eyes wide, as Camille stopped at her side and placed a firm, steady hand on her shoulder. The touch was everything. It didn't say, "It's okay." It said, "I'm here, and we handle this together." Monroe took a breath, trying to keep things casual. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "you must be the mom from the stories." Camille tilted her head slightly, her voice calm, but razor sharp. "Why don't you tell me what story, exactly, you think this is?" Camille Brooks did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her presence alone shifted the weight in the room. Her uniform, her posture, her silence, it all said more than Monroe's string of dismissive jokes ever could. Officer Derek Monroe stood with one hand on his hip, trying to look relaxed, like he still had control of the moment. But he didn't. Not anymore. "Well," he said with a small laugh, "looks like the cavalry showed up after all." Camille's gaze didn't flinch. Zaria stood still at her side, the grip of her mom's hand on her shoulder grounding her like an anchor. It was the first time in the last 20 minutes she didn't feel alone. Camille looked Monroe over. Not in anger, not even in judgment. Just measured. Just clear. "You mocked my daughter," she said simply. "In front of strangers. For telling the truth." Monroe chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "I wasn't mocking her. Just a little misunderstanding. Kids say wild things sometimes. No harm done." Camille took a half step forward. Her tone didn't change. Her eyes didn't waver. "You made a joke out of her truth. You laughed at her pride. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice." The crowd had gone still. Even the soft background music from the store speakers seemed distant now. All attention was fixed on the moment unfolding before them. Monroe shifted. "Look, Sergeant Brooks." "Staff Sergeant," she corrected, her voice like glass, clear, strong, and impossible to ignore. He hesitated. "Right. Staff Sergeant. I didn't mean anything by it." "But you did," she said. "You meant to put her in her place. You meant to make her feel small because what she said didn't fit into the box you built in your mind about who can serve, who can lead, who can wear this." She motioned briefly to her uniform, not as a boast, but as a fact. "You don't know me," she continued. "You don't know what I've done or what I've earned. But you decided to laugh because my daughter believed in me. Because she believed in something that challenged your expectations." Zaria looked up at her mother, eyes wide. It was everything she had wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. Camille didn't need a microphone. Her words echoed louder than anything Monroe had thrown out. The first warning had been delivered. And it was only the beginning. For a long moment, no one said a word. Monroe stood there, no longer grinning, his weight shifting between his feet. Camille's voice hadn't wavered, but it had shaken something loose in the room. The silence wasn't on his side anymore. It had turned, subtle, but real. Across the store, someone cleared their throat. A woman near the checkout put down a stack of shirts she'd been pretending to sort. Even the two teenagers by the hoodies looked a little less amused. Zaria felt it. The shift. She stepped forward, just slightly, her mom's hand still resting gently on her shoulder. Her voice came out quiet but steady. "I told the truth. And no one believed me." The words landed harder than expected. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't dramatic. Just honest. And for the first time, people really listened. Brielle stood beside her now, her voice shaky but brave. "She's not lying," she said. "I've seen pictures. Awards. Even a flag folded in a box on her dresser." Monroe exhaled sharply, trying to regain control. "Look, I already said I might have misjudged. But come on, can you blame me? Special Forces." Camille didn't flinch. "You misjudged more than a situation. You misjudged a child. And you turned your doubt into a public show." He looked at her, lips parting, but no words came. Zaria's heart thudded in her chest, not from fear this time, but from something that felt like relief. She looked around the store, and for the first time, saw more than spectators. She saw faces changing. A quiet voice from the side spoke up. She said her mom was in special forces. That's not the kind of thing a kid makes up. Another added, that uniform's real. That rank's real. I've seen my brother wear the same stripes. And then, a slow clap. It wasn't dramatic. Just one woman, arms crossed, nodding as she clapped once. Twice. A few others joined. Not everyone, but enough to shift the air for good. Zaria turned to look at her mom. Camille nodded once, not to the crowd, not to Monroe, but to her daughter. That's when Zaria knew. She hadn't been wrong to speak up. She'd just spoken in a world that wasn't ready. Until now. Monroe finally broke the silence. He ran a hand through his short hair, cleared his throat, and gave a forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. All right, he said, his voice lighter now, almost casual. I'll admit it. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I shouldn't have laughed. So, sorry, kid. Zaria blinked. That was it. No eye contact. No pause. Just a shrug of an apology tossed out like spare change. The kind of sorry you say when you want to move on without really facing what happened. Camille raised an eyebrow. She didn't speak right away. She let the words hang in the air, flat and empty, giving everyone in the store a moment to feel how thin they were. Then she stepped forward, just one step, but it was enough. That wasn't an apology, she said, her voice still calm, still controlled, but firm enough to stop Monroe mid-breath. That was you trying to save face. Monroe's jaw tightened. I said I was sorry. Camille shook her head slightly. No, you said something that sounded like sorry. But it didn't come from a place of understanding. You didn't apologize to my daughter. You apologized to the discomfort of being wrong. The crowd was quiet again. Listening. Watching. You embarrassed her, Camille continued. In public. You doubted her because she didn't look like the story you were used to. And now that the truth is in front of you, you want to move on like it didn't happen. Monroe looked at Zaria, finally meeting her eyes. She didn't look away. Camille tilted her head. If you mean it, say it to her. Not to me. To the girl you laughed at. Monroe hesitated. Then, with a bit of effort, he turned toward Zaria. His voice lowered, just a little. Zaria, I was wrong. I shouldn't have laughed. I shouldn't have assumed. You were telling the truth. And I didn't believe you. That was my mistake. I'm sorry. Zaria nodded once. She didn't smile. She didn't rush to accept it. She just heard it. And for the first time, it felt like someone really did too. Camille didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Because her daughter had just received the one thing Monroe had no authority to deny, respect. As Monroe's words faded into the air, something shifted again. This time, it came from the crowd. The people who had stood silent before, watching, listening, filming, now began to move. Not away, but closer. They weren't there for the spectacle anymore. They were there for the moment. For the message. A man in a flannel shirt near the back cleared his throat. That kid stood her ground, he said, his voice steady. She didn't back down. That means something. A woman with a toddler on her hip nodded in agreement. We always say we want kids to be honest. Then when they are, we treat them like they made it up. That's not right. Another voice chimed in, softer but firm. I've served, said a man wearing a baseball cap with a faded veteran's patch. I know what that uniform means. I know what it takes to earn that rank. That woman right there. He pointed to Camille. She deserves every bit of respect. It was no longer about the officer or the girl. It had become something bigger. A reminder. Zaria looked around, stunned by the shift. People were no longer looking at her like she was a curiosity or a liar. They were looking at her like she mattered, like her voice had weight. And for the first time that day, she believed it. One of the store employees stepped out from behind the counter. She didn't say much, just walked over and gently touched Camille's arm. "Thank you," she said, "for your service, and for standing up for your daughter." Camille nodded, but her eyes remained on Zaria. Because this moment wasn't about her. It was about her daughter. It was about the truth. And how sometimes, it takes one person's courage to remind everyone else what they were too afraid to say out loud. The bystanders weren't bystanders anymore. They were witnesses. And witnesses have power. Not just to observe, but to speak. To acknowledge. To correct. Zaria didn't need a medal or applause. She just needed to be heard. And now, finally, she was. Camille reached down and gently squeezed her daughter's hand. Zaria squeezed back. Because the worst of it was behind them. But the lesson, that would stay with everyone who saw it. Zaria didn't speak right away. Even as the crowd began to drift, even as the tension in the room softened, she just stood there, still, quiet, thinking. A few minutes ago, she had been gripping the edges of a lie that never existed. Not because she made something up, but because someone else had decided the truth didn't look like her. And for a while, she almost believed him. Almost. She looked up at her mom now, saw the calm in her expression, the strength in her eyes, and realized something she hadn't seen clearly until this moment. Her mom had always been a force. She had always led with quiet power, discipline, and grace. But what made her strong wasn't just the uniform. It was how she moved through the world, unshaken. How she responded when tested. How she made the truth stand taller than any insult. Zaria glanced around the store. No one was laughing now. No one was whispering. And more importantly, no one was doubting. Not her. Not anymore. "Mom," she said softly, "did I make things worse by speaking up?" Camille turned to her, her voice low and sure. "No. You made it better. You didn't back down. You didn't lie to protect yourself. You told the truth, and you stood by it, even when people tried to tear it apart." Zaria nodded slowly. "I thought, maybe I should have stayed quiet." Camille knelt so they were eye level, the background noise of the store fading as she spoke. "Quiet doesn't protect you," she said. "It just gives space for other people's lies to grow louder. Speaking up is hard. But it's what makes you strong." Zaria blinked, holding back tears, not of shame this time, but of release. She hadn't just spoken for herself today. She had spoken for every kid who'd been told their story didn't fit the mold. For every daughter who'd watched the world shrink their mother's worth down to what people expected her to be. And now, with the truth out in the open, with her mom standing beside her, Zaria didn't feel small anymore. She felt seen. And that made all the difference. She stood a little taller. Because today wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about reclaiming the right to be believed. And that lesson, it was hers now. Forever. As the last voices settled and the store returned to its normal hum, Zaria and Camille stood side by side, no longer under scrutiny but in quiet recognition. The shelves were still lined with shoes, the fluorescent lights still hummed above, but the space felt changed. Not because the layout shifted, but because the energy had. Zaria looked down at the sneakers she had picked out an hour ago. Somehow, they didn't matter anymore. Not in the way they had before. She turned to her mom. "Can we go?" Camille nodded, her hands still resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. Of course. As they walked toward the exit, the crowd parted. Not in fear. Not in obligation. But in respect. People moved aside with a quiet sort of reverence, like they knew something significant had happened, even if they couldn't quite explain it. One man near the front, the same man who had stayed silent earlier, finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said, nodding at Camille. "Thank you. Not just for your service, but for setting the record straight. For all of us." Camille gave a small nod in return. We all serve in different ways. Sometimes, speaking the truth is service enough. They stepped outside into the fading light of a Texas afternoon. The air felt a little cooler, a little calmer. Zaria let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She didn't feel humiliated anymore. She felt powerful. Because today, the truth hadn't just survived, it had demanded to be seen. So here's the thing. If you're listening to this right now, if you've ever been dismissed, mocked, or questioned just for speaking what's real, let this story remind you of something simple. Your truth doesn't need permission. And it sure doesn't need approval. Whether you're a child standing in a store or a parent standing behind one, your voice matters. And when someone tries to laugh it away, you don't shrink. You stand taller. And if you believe in stories like this, stories about courage, about being seen, about how respect should never be optional, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Not for numbers, but for every voice that's been silenced, every truth that deserves to be heard, and every kid who's still learning that who they are is more than enough.